Welcome to this tutorial on strings. In this tutorial, I will provide you with a very brief refresher on what we've talked about strings so far, and then also talk about some of the methods I can use with strings. Okay. By now you already know that when I have a string, right, the individual characters in a string can be accessed using the index positions. From left to right, you can access h by using in index position 0 and so on, and from right to left you can also use the index values -1 all the way to -5 to access the individual elements. For example, if I have a string by the name Tim, I can actually print or access the first element T by using the index position 0. So name sub 0 would print the letter T. Okay. One other interesting thing is that, of course, once I have a variable here, I can add other strings to it. So I can change, this is basically saying name equal to name plus OTHY. This is going to take the variable the value Tim and add OTHY to it, and the new value of name would be Timothy. Okay, so it'll print the new value of Timothy. So we can do this, but what you cannot do is take the individual elements, right, like name sub 0, and change the value from T to J. This will give you an error message. We talked about this. Okay, so if you first, let's run this, and you'll see that you get name sub 0 is T, that gets printed because of the print statement here. And you also see that this statement ended up adding OTHY at the end, and the new value is assigned to the variable name. That's what's printed here. Print name is Timothy. But if you want, if you try to uncomment this and you run this, I'm going to uncomment this, and I'm going to comment this, and if I run this, you should get an error message. Okay, because strings are immutable. Okay, so please keep this in mind. You cannot do this for strings. Okay, but you can do this for lists. Again, strings are a special case of lists, one way to think about it. So you can do this for lists, but you cannot do this for strings. Okay, so let's move on. You also know how to access the individual elements of a string variable, like individual elements as in the characters here, right? So I provided you with a code, right, using while loop as well as using for loop. Two methods using for loop. So review this, make sure that you understand this. How do I access the individual elements in a list? Okay, that's also called traversing strings, right? Examining the string to process one character at a time. Okay, so what I would like you to do is, once you understand these concepts, please try to write a program to do this. Ask a user to enter a number, okay, and then print the total of the individual digits. If the user enters 1, 2, 3, 4, again, remember that when you use an input statement, the resulting value is a string value. So maybe there's, so you get the string value. So what I would like you to do is basically use the program, write a program to sum these individual numbers. Okay, I want the sum of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 if the user entered 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so think about it, write a program for this. Okay, so based on the concepts we've learned so far, you should be able to solve this problem. All right, and you also know string slicing. So how do you take a string, right, and then remove or access specific parts of a string? Again, I'm not going to go over this here. Just review the notes right here and make sure that you understand these two cells, code cells. Okay, how do you slice string? Very similar to slicing lists and accessing the individual elements in a list. All right, now what I want to do is maybe spend some time, just look at the operator in and not in. Can be very useful when it comes to writing code. Okay, for example, if you have a text, let's say string variable, hello, are you there, right? And let's say that you want to test to see if a substring, some slice of a value is present inside the string. It could be just a character. Is h present in this text, or it could be is some word, some sequence of characters, is it present in this variable, string variable. Okay, one simple way to test for this is basically use the in operator. Is slice, the variable slice, right, represented by hell, right, is it present in this variable? In this case, the answer is obvious. Yes, it is present, right? So if that's true, then print substring is found in text. If it's not true, print substring not found in text. So in this case, yes, HELL is present in this text. Okay. What happens if I say HEL1 or HEL3? Do you think HEL3, HELL3 is present in the original string text? Let's find out. Let's run this. It should say substring not found in text. Okay. So again, the in operator and the not in operator are very useful in writing code. Okay. One other thing that I wanted to talk about is I can, given a string variable, I can actually convert that to a list. Okay, so I would use this function called list, and then open bracket, write down the name of the variable, string variable, and then close bracket. Okay, and this should convert the string variable to a list. Okay, so it's somewhat similar to the typecasting you've done before, like int, like when you use an input statement, sometimes maybe you convert the resultant value to an integer or a float. You use int and float. Sometimes you even convert an integer to string. You use str. So similarly, I can use list to convert from one data type to a different data type. Okay, so let's see what happens when I actually convert this and assign it to a variable ch. So the original variable brie is still there, but the variable ch is now a list with 4 data elements, b, r, i, e. So something else I want you to try is try, based on the concepts we've looked at so far, write a program to count the number of times the letter E appears in a string that the user provides. And also, this is reasonably simple. Write a user-defined function called genLoginID. All right, now let's move on to string methods. You already know what a method is. If there's a variable, let's say s equal to hello, now I can use methods. So say string variable s dot methods, right? A whole host of methods I can use to process the string. Okay, so now let's look at some examples. Here's a string variable ts equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can actually test whether the individual characters in here are all digits. So this method basically takes a string variable, right, and invokes a method called isDigit, open bracket, close bracket, isDigit, and returns true if it's all digits, returns false if it's not all digits. Okay, so that's going to assign the returned value to a variable called bv, happens to be a Boolean variable. Okay, similarly, I'm going to run this in one minute. Similarly, there are also other methods like isLower. In this case, it's checking to see whether the characters inside the string are all lowercase or not. It'll return the value true if they're all lowercase. If not, it's going to return the value false. Okay, so let's run this and you see that here it's 1, 2, 3, 4 are the digits. Yes, so the value of bv is true. For the second variable here, mp, are they all lowercase? The answer is yes, so it's also going to be true. So what happens if it's 1, 2, 3, 4 a, and what happens if it's Monty Python in caps? Right, something like this. Let's run this and see. So you're going to see false because not all of the characters are digits. Similarly, not all of the characters are lowercase. So you're going to get a false. So again, useful to have these, useful to know these methods, okay, that you can invoke or use on a string variable. Similarly, you have something for, are they all alphanumeric? Are they all alphabets? Are they all digits? Lowercase, uppercase, and is there a space present in there? Okay, so check to see if you understand how these functions work. Okay, I'm not going to go over them all here. You can also review the material, from the book that basically gives you examples. All right. So here are some examples of methods that are very useful. Again, when you write code. I'm actually providing you with the solution to this question I asked you. How do you sum the digits of the number? Okay, try not to look at this. Hopefully you've done this by now, but if you haven't done the exercise, don't look at the solution, but instead try to do this on your own. Okay, and then come back and have a look and compare your code with my code here. All right, let's look at some of the methods that we can use on strings. Okay, so here are two examples of methods: split and replace. Okay, I'm going to come back to the split methods a bit later. Okay, let's just look at this particular variable mp equal to Monty Python Pink. Obviously, this is a string variable with the value Monty Python Pink. Okay, I can use the method replace to replace this particular sequence of characters with a different sequence of characters. Okay, so here I'm replacing pi with psi. Let's run this and see what happens. So you will notice that this is now Monty Python Pink, but the original string variable is unchanged. Again, please note that this is an important differentiation. Usually for string methods, right, you work on the original string variable, but you do not really change its value. Instead, the method oftentimes spits out a value that's useful. Okay, either you use a print statement to print out, as I've done here, or maybe you want to assign that output to a variable. Like you can say new string, new mp equal to, and this function here. Sorry, in this method here. Okay, so the main point that I'm trying to get across here is that the output of this method is oftentimes very useful. This is in contrast, sharp contrast to list methods. Most list methods, when you invoke a method, when you use a method on the list, it works directly on the list and it changes the list, right? And oftentimes the output of the list method is meaningless. It's going to return a none data type, right? It's not going to be useful. So for the string, it's different because strings are immutable. Typically, you don't touch the original string. Rather, your methods manipulate the string value right here and then return the changed string value. So it's up to you to either print it or assign it to another variable that you may then want to use it in the program. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's very critical. So let me comment this out. Okay, so what does split do? So I'm going to uncomment this. It's basically looking at this value, and by default, it's going to split the string based on the spaces here. So it's going to split this into three parts: Monty, Python, and Pink, and return it as a list. So this list will have 3 data elements. So let me run this so you can see what the value is. Okay, so I want to print mp split. So let me run this. So you see that the original string variable now is still there, Monty Python Pink, but the split method is casted to return a list that consists of 3 data elements. Okay, now I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to remove the comment here. So you notice that instead of not having any argument here, split open bracket close bracket, I'm actually using the letter P, okay, as a delimiter. I'm asking the split method to split the variable mp, right, based on this delimiter, right? So before we used space as a delimiter, but now I'm asking the program to use P as a delimiter, okay, to split based on it. Let me run this and see if you can understand the output. So you have Monty and a space, and note that there is no P because that's the delimiter. I'm using this to decide when to do the cutoff, right? Then you have YTHON and then a space, right? Then it stops because here's a P, not a P. And then you have the last 3 characters that's after the P. So Again, 3 characters in this case. Again, only because 3 characters only because there are 2 P's. Okay. If there are multiple P's, if there are 4 P's, then it's going to be 5 splits. Okay. So understand, make sure that you understand how the split works, especially MP split, the default, because it's a very useful method that you would use later on. Okay, so make sure you understand this, and make sure that you also understand this. Okay, MP split with an argument. In this case, we use P. All right, so let's look at a couple of other useful, very powerful methods. So strip, L strip, and R strip. What do they do? So let's take a look. Here we have a variable called myStr. Okay, and here you have the value that has some white spaces in the beginning, some white spaces at the end. It has one white space in the middle. Okay, so what happens if you use strip method on this variable? Let's find out. So I'm gonna run this. So you see that the output MSTR here has all of the white spaces, and it's actually counting the length, which is 15. Okay, and MSTR1, when I applied the strip method and I assigned the value to MSTR1, you notice that of course the middle space is still there, but the spaces in the beginning and at the end are gone. So the 2 spaces in the beginning, 2 spaces at the end, it's gone, and you have the length of the hello world 11. Okay, so strip basically strips out the white spaces in the front, in the beginning, and at the very end. And very useful when you're working with textual information or text information in a file. Okay, maybe sometimes you want to strip out the white spaces in the beginning or at the end. Okay, and L strip and R strips are variations of the strip method. For example, if I change this to L strip, what do you think happens? Let me run this. So you see that it stripped out the white spaces in the beginning on the left hand side, but it left the white space on the right intact. Okay, similarly, if I use the R strip method and rerun this, you notice that it leaves the spaces, white spaces on the left alone, but it did remove the white spaces on the right. Okay, this space is there because when you have print statements separated by commas, you're going to have a space. Okay, but it did strip these 2 spaces. Okay, that's what the R strip does. So L strip, R strip, and strip are useful methods for you to remember, because they strip away the white spaces. Very useful when you're processing files. Okay, what happens here? Now, same strip method, right? Instead of open bracket, close bracket, I have an argument in there. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen? Think about it before you run it. I'm specifying, strip instead of space, perhaps strip the star. Let's see what happens. So it strips out whatever is inside, right, at the front and at the end. Same idea, but now I'm specifying an argument, something that I want to be stripped out. Okay, again, useful variation. Here are some additional methods. Again, there are a lot of methods for strings, but again, all of these methods are useful. It's helpful for you to write them down somewhere and make sure that you understand what these methods do. And over time, with practice, you will eventually know what a specific method does without even thinking about it. Okay, you just need more practice, and you need to write this down at some place and have a look so that you remember what these methods do. Okay. Now here we have this string variable MP assigned to a value Monty Python. Okay, and I can use the find method, right, to find whether a sequence of characters are present, similar to something that we looked at before. But the difference here is that the method actually returns the lowest index value or index position in the string if the substring is found. Okay, if the substring is not there, it's going to return the value -1. Okay, again, very, very useful, especially when you're processing files with textual information. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. So yes, is there a Python? Is there a sequence of characters that look like this here? Yes, Python is here. What should it return? The lowest index in the string. So position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to return 6 as the value, as the output. Okay. So what happens if instead of Python I typed in, let's say, MNTY, right? Is MNTY a sequence of character? Is there a sequence of characters that corresponds to MNTY here? Yeah, there are individual characters M and N and TY, but there is no sequence of characters that directly corresponds to this, right? There is a O in the middle, so it's not going to find this sequence. So what's going to happen? Let's find out. It's going to say -1. This indicates that instead of returning some value, it's returning -1. So it does not mean it's the last letter here, So this is this method's way of telling you. So again, you need to know this. So this is the method, find method's way of telling you that the substring is not found. Okay, so keep that in mind. Based on all the concepts you've learned so far, I'm going to ask you to program to ask the user to input an email. For example, let's assume for the time being that the input is going to be this. Okay, let's just use this as an input. And then I want you to write a program to separate the user ID from the email and print it. So the output should be NK9999. All right. Here are some examples. We talked about the split method, right? In this case, there is no, I don't really have an argument here. So it's going to be splitting it based on the space. So the words, I'm assigning that value to the variable words, should be the list data type. If I run this, it's going to have 3 data elements, the big Lebowski, right? Now what I can do, another useful thing is that I can actually take this list, I can convert it back to a string. So how I would do that is that this is basically a variable, so don't be confused. It's a variable. In this case, I don't have anything in here. It's an empty string. Okay, so there's open quote, close quote, and I'm basically saying take the list and join this right together and leave no space in the middle because this got no space. So let me run this, and you have a string data type, string variable. Movie is a string, MOV is a string variable, but there is no space. What happens if you do want a space? Quite easy. Just go back here, change the value for this variable. There you go. Put in a space, run the code. There's going to be space. Okay. What happens if you want these three words to be separated by a star? Right. Just type in star, and you're going to have a new output. Right. The star, big star, Lebowski. So again, useful to know. Maybe you won't use it as much, but it's kind of a corollary to what we did before with the split method. If I have a list, I can always squish it back to a string value rather. Okay. Here are some additional methods, the last 2 methods I'm going to talk about when it comes to string. So given a string variable with a certain value, I can actually check whether that variable ends with a specific sequence of characters, whether a variable ends with a specific sequence of characters. Okay, so I'm going to run this. I'm going to leave this for you to interpret. Make sure that you understand why you see a true and a false output for this code. Fairly simple, so I trust that you can do it. Again, to remind you, before you come back to class next week, make sure that you do this assignment. Okay, it's next week. Thank you.